This secluded country mansion housed some of the most disturbed and vulnerable children in care.
There wasn't no care. It's like being in prison, being like an animal, being in the zoo.
Find a solution at least.
This is the owner who loved showing off his pioneering home to the television cameras.
The bathroom door just come flying open. He didn't say nothing to me, just like come over and punch me in my face.
And this is the owner's son, the home's director of childcare.
He's just a mindless thug who enjoyed inflicting pain. Because when he was inflicting pain on kids, he smiled.
How did a former grocer and his son convince the world they were carrying out a groundbreaking experiment when in reality they were running one of Britain's most brutal children's homes?
I'm telling you that I have not done a thing wrong.
Why is it then that all these children made these statements, Mr. Persich?
Ask them!
We have asked them, Mr. Persich, and they've all told us the same thing. They've all said that you're a violent thug.
Barnet General Hospital in Margate. July last year. A 16-year-old girl arrives a casualty with a broken ankle.
That's it. Here we go.
She's been brought here by care workers. The private children's home where she lives says the injury is an accident. Apparently, a fire extinguisher had fallen onto her foot during a tantrum. An X-ray revealed her ankle is fractured.
It was pretty widely known amongst the staff from the night it happened that it didn't happen as it did, that the young person in question had actually had her leg broken by a violent twisting action. I mean, those sort of things went on all the time and were covered up.
The London programme has obtained this confidential report by Kent Social Services. It too presents a very different picture from the official explanation given by the home. It was compiled by senior social worker Sheila Travers and is based on the eyewitness account of one of the care workers on duty that night. To protect the girl's identity, we've changed her name to Sharon.
Sharon was being disruptive in her behaviour and had been so most of the day. She was half sitting, lying in the passageway, kicking the staff room door with her feet. She did swing her leg round and kick the fire extinguisher, setting it off.
Among the care workers called to the scene was Ian Bridger.
Ian Bridger was reported to have grabbed hold of her leg, swinging her around. He is then reported to have taken hold of her heel in one hand and toes in the other, and twisting her ankle in a sharp, violent motion, telling her to stop about. Sharon screamed in pain immediately and was extremely distressed.
Another member of staff then helped Sharon sit on a chair and place her foot on a cushion.
Ian Bridger then felt the ankle area again, stating that it wasn't broken. He twisted Sharon's foot again in the opposite direction. This caused her further pain and she screamed and cried again.
We have obtained Sharon's medical records. They also contradict the home's claim that a fire extinguisher fell on her foot. They confirm her ankle was physically twisted. Care worker Ian Bridger was suspended after the incident, but later reinstated and promoted to a senior post at the home. Sharon's mother has asked not to be identified in order to protect her daughter.
I'd like to do the same thing to him, what he did to her, and see how he feels. I really have got so much bitterness.
This is Frontier House. It's an idyllic location hidden away in the heart of the Kent countryside. For the children who came here, it must have seemed like a million miles from home. Many, like Sharon, were from deprived parts of London. Most had been in trouble with the police or had backgrounds of abuse. They were amongst the most difficult youngsters to place in the care system and desperately needed stability in their lives. Frontier House was supposed to offer them that security. For many of the children who arrived here, it was quite simply their last chance. Mark is now 16, a young offender. He went to Frontier House last year. His social worker believed the home would offer him a fresh start.
Yeah, when I arrived at Frontier House and my social worker, I was like amazed at the size of the place and that. Thought it'd be wicked. It looked like a big hotel.
The home was run by this man, former grocer John Persich. He was a prominent figure in the National Association of Boys Clubs and had been involved in fostering since the late 1970s. In 1990, he bought Parsonage Farm near Sandwich and transformed it into the headquarters of Frontier House, his residential childcare company.
Here in Kent,
Kent County Council registered Parsonage Farm as a children's home 2 years ago.
But to find out sort of what...
They even went on television and praised it as an alternative to secure units for young offenders.
I think it's one of the great success stories of social service departments.
Frontier House boasted an impressive range of services, including therapeutic care by specialist staff. London boroughs such as Barnet, Greenwich, Islington and Lambeth were among the home's clients.
Frontier House appeared to offer all that local authorities in London would be dreaming about for young people who need care and protection. It offered fantastic facilities in idyllic surroundings, and above all, they were willing to take difficult young people with challenging behaviour.
I think people perhaps don't realise, and maybe some of the politicians don't realise, is that it is better to work with the young people rather than lock them up.
Persich revelled in publicity, inviting the television cameras into the home for a second time. Tony Gartland and Jackie Strand were recruited to Frontier House in April last year.
Skills rather than criminal skills.
Everything was planned, orchestrated and rehearsed beforehand. Things were built specially for the cameras, like the woodworking workshop. That didn't exist until before the cameras turned up. We built it in the 2 weeks before.
The obstacle course at Frontier House was built specifically for Meridian Television. And it was a laugh because it was never used again.
But local authorities were also being misled about the quality of staff.
Most staff told us that generally they were recruited to their particular posts either through knowing a member of the Persich family and being invited to work for them, or, in the case of some members of staff, being the male or female partner of a current member of staff.
Tony Gartland and Jackie Strand lived close to Frontier House. They complained when they caught youngsters from the home damaging their car.
Mr. Persich Sr. came to see us with Ian Bridger. I had job applications laying on the table because I was thinking about changing my job, and obviously I suppose he must have seen them, and he offered me a job at Frontier.
Soon after Jackie started work, her partner Tony was asked if he would like a job.
My background previous to that was I'd worked in the electrical contracting industry, retail and warehousing and distribution. I'd got no experience of working in a children's home.
Few staff at Frontier House had any experience in childcare, and there was little training. Worse still, Persich also failed to carry out checks on the people he employed. In 1991, care worker Frank Beck was convicted of sexual and physical abuse against youngsters. A subsequent government inquiry recommended that homeowners vet staff for criminal records.
During my time at Frontier House, police checks weren't carried out. This was actually pointed out to John Persich Sr. at some point, and he refused to carry them out because of the cost involved.
The London programme has discovered that at least one member of staff was a convicted criminal. Ian Bridger, the care worker reported to have broken Sharon's ankle, has a record for assault. In 1991, he attacked 2 people and committed criminal damage. It was the job of Kent County Council to monitor conditions at Frontier House. Their inspectors came here at least twice a year. During these visits, they apparently saw a well-managed and orderly home. There was no cause for alarm. But in reality, a very different story was unfolding. For behind these walls, the man who children were forced to call Uncle John was running a ruthless regime.
You're going to have to respect the staff a little bit more at times. because if you want respect from people, then you must respect them as well.
Percy Senior used to rule, it has been described, with a good deal of good humour. Totally wrong. He used to rule by fear.
Well, when I first come in, I wondered why he was getting called Uncle John. One of the ex-kids, it was out of respect because of all the things they do in that, but behind his back, everyone called him, like the staff and kids, the Fat Controller. He controls everything. When he was there, it was his world.
Children soon realised what living in Uncle John's world was like, especially when they stepped out of line.
I remember one instance just after I started. One of the young people had moved a chair from one room to another, which was not allowed. John Persich Sr. grabbed hold of his hair, pulled him around the room, shouting at him to get hold of the chair and take it back. He was crying because his hair was getting pulled quite hard. It must have registered with John Persich that I wasn't happy. His words to me were, "Don't try this. I can get away with this, but you can't."
Social workers remained oblivious to the extreme punishments being meted out. In fact, they were impressed by his reputation for tough discipline and continued to entrust children to his care. The growing popularity of Frontier House meant that the company had to expand to meet the demand. Persich opened 3 smaller homes, including this one, St Mildred's, in Ramsgate. With local authorities willing to pay up to £1,000 a week for each of the 20 children in his care, turnover was approaching £1 million a year. Last Christmas, life for the youngsters at St Mildred's was far from festive. Persich claimed the home would only house 3 children. Under the law, that meant it didn't have to be registered with a local authority. In fact, as many as 6 youngsters had been crammed into the home's bedsits. Food was rationed, conditions almost Dickensian.
The Christmas period was pretty horrendous. Not only was there complaints about the shortage of food, but also the water tank had broken down, so there was no hot water for washing or bathing. One of the excuses was that they didn't have the money at the time to get the water tank sorted out. But at the same time, they just bought another building in Dover and were spending thousands of pounds fixing that up.
Life at Parsonage Farm was just as tough. As nightfall descended, staff were instructed to carry out a strict procedure. Alarms were set on the door of every bedroom.
You used to get a big siren sort of thing. You used to go off, just go to the toilet. And then they used to come running upstairs, see what you was doing. And they'd tell you to go back to bed. And like, you used to feel like you'd done something wrong, because like, you got this noise straight away.
It was like being in prison, but it shouldn't have been. It was a therapeutic unit, or whatever it was, and like it was supposed to be like caring for the kids there and stuff, but there wasn't no care. Just being like an animal, locked up like an animal. It was being in the zoo.
This is a totally unacceptable practice. If the intention is to restrict young people's liberty, then that is totally punitive and extreme and is not permissible in a children's home. Children's homes are not meant to be prisons. They're meant to be homely.
Persich liked to run a tight ship and appoint people he thought he could trust. His fellow directors included his wife and his daughter, but by far the most important was his son, John Jr. As head of childcare, Persich Jr. was charged with enforcing discipline at the company's network of homes. He'd gone from being a vacuum cleaner salesman to controlling some of the most difficult and damaged youngsters in the care system.
My personal opinion of John Persich Jr. He's not the sort of person that you would want as a friend. He's just a mindless thug who enjoyed inflicting pain. Because when he was inflicting pain on kids, he smiled.
Staff en masse also spoke about the language that John Persich Jr. uses with young people. He's particularly verbally aggressive. We were given numerous examples of young people being taunted with issues of their past.
I mean, there's one girl that suffered from fits, and she was regularly told by Persich Jr. and 1 or 2 other members of the management team, because you're mad. I mean, that's not what she wanted to hear. You're mental. You have fits. Go on, have a fit. And there was odd times when that girl did have a fit, and Persich Jr. and 1 or 2 others would stand over her and just watch and laugh. And say, go on then, go on. You're putting it on. Go on, have a fit, die.
16-year-old Michelle Drool arrived at Frontier House in 1992 after problems at home. She was also taunted by John Persich Jr.
John Persich Jr. used to say to me that my parents didn't care, that I was the reason why they had so many arguments, that I caused them to split up on numerous occasions. I used to try not to cry in front of him because he'd laugh. I used to fight back the tears because if I started crying, he'd say it even more.
John Persich Jr.'s role within the unit has been described as a troubleshooter. He turns up at any of the units if a young person has been displaying difficulties at the farm during the daytime. He will come in, according to staff, slap the young person around, call them all sorts of names, and then leave the other staff on duty to pick up the pieces.
When Persich Jr. lost his temper with children, or if children regularly misbehaved, they received the ultimate punishment. It was something staff and residents came to know as bouncing.
It was called a bouncing because you got bounced off everything in the room. Like, if you was in the dining room and he'd come in, he'd like bounce you off a table, bounce you along the walls, put you on the floor, throw you around, grab you by your hair, drag you around the room.
And if one of the staff had told them, or one of the other kids had said, "Oh, you're going to cop it off Johnny," you know, then they were pretty worried because they knew they were going to get some pain inflicted.
I just got a slap off Uncle John. I was upset, still went to the bathroom to like, brush my teeth, and I heard Johnny coming upstairs. I thought, no, I'm good, definitely going to get a bouncing now. John come flying into the bathroom in a rage, punched me in my face, started punching me in the top of the head, just throwing me around in the bathroom, and then like it just like left me there. I was still lying back in the bath and crying my eyes out.
But Persich Jr.'s main target was Sharon, the girl whose ankle had been broken during the struggle with Ian Bridger.
Young John Persich set about her. She went to go out of the back door, said she was leaving. He dragged her back by the hair. She was on her knees, dragged her across the concrete floor and brought her back inside, threw her on the sofa. When she tried to leave again, she slammed the door. So then he got her by the hair again and dragged her back to the door and bashed her head against the door.
I think that it was disgusting, their behaviour towards her, because she weren't really a 16-year-old girl. She was more like a 10-year-old that hadn't learnt nothing. She used to try and jump down the stairs, and I think she cut her wrists.
Because she was physically, verbally, mentally abused, her life, her quality of life, put it that way, her quality of life was zilch, nothing at Frontier House. She tried committing suicide on loads of occasions.
Ironically, in a progress report to Sharon's social worker at Lambeth, Persich Sr. said she was loved by staff. Yet this didn't stop him from describing her as the home's most difficult resident and asking for an increased fee to look after her. Persich Sr. insisted control of unruly youngsters should be left to senior staff like him, his son and Ian Bridger. But to hide their physical and verbal abuse from social services, Persich had to rely on other members of staff keeping quiet. Tony and Jackie say they didn't speak out because they were inexperienced and worried about losing their jobs. They finally quit the home earlier this year.
I feel very guilty in allowing that situation to carry on. I almost had a nervous breakdown because of it. I feel awful about not talking about it to anybody and what the children went through. I even now, you know, although I work elsewhere with children, even now I cannot forget what those kids went through, and I probably never will ever forget what those kids went through at that home. It was awful.
But it wasn't just the silence of staff that Persich had to rely on. Children had to be kept quiet as well.
At Frontier House, if you phoned anybody up, your social worker or anybody, you had someone sitting right next to you, writing down every single word that you said to them.
The Persiches were able to cover up their reign of violence with worrying ease. Children who were abused found it hard to complain. Care workers, who should have blown the whistle, kept quiet. And most damning of all, the Social Services Department, charged with monitoring the home, failed to detect the warning signs. The system had completely failed the children of Frontier House. It wasn't until January, some 9 months after allegations were first made, that Kent Social Services launched a joint investigation with the police. A boy was removed from the home by Greenwich in October after claiming he'd been assaulted. Increasingly concerned, other councils withdrew their children. By July, the home was forced to close. Sharon, who had endured more violence and torment than any other youngster, was among the last to leave.
Well, I actually sat there and wept because I thought, you know, why should my daughter go through a great deal of these things? Why should it be allowed to go on?
It was Lambeth Council who had placed Sharon at Frontier House, yet they failed to monitor her placement properly. Confidential documents revealed she had complained to her social worker just days after her ankle was broken at St Mildred's in July last year. They also disclosed that Lambeth wasn't even aware that Sharon had been moved from Parsonage Farm. Lambeth told us, "We have fully cooperated with the investigation into this home. Information concerning clients is confidential." But ultimate responsibility for the scandal of Frontier House must rest with Kent County Council. They registered the home and placed most youngsters there. We wanted to interview Kent's Director of Social Services, Peter Smallridge, the man who had gone on television to praise Frontier House, but he refused. His department said, "As soon as we received allegations, we began an investigation. Frontier House has received notice that the council intends to cancel their registration." Some 20 residents and members of staff have so far come forward to make allegations of abuse. Inquiries by Kent Council continue, but the police have dropped the criminal case on the advice of the Crown Prosecution Service.
I believe the Crown Prosecution Service should reconsider their decision. Otherwise, we are left in a situation that is totally untenable, where these individuals could actually set up another children's home in the neighbouring county and practice the same thing that's happened here. That's utterly appalling.
You're Mr. Persich, are you?
We wanted to interview the Persiches about the allegations made against them, but they refused. So we paid a visit to Parsonage Farm, where we met John Jr.
What is your response to allegations that you committed serious physical, serious verbal abuse against children who are entrusted in your care?
Well, it's not true. That's my response. That's what I told the police. That's what I've told social services, and that is what I will tell the tribunal when we get to it.
Can you explain then why a number of the children...
Independent cases, individual cases.
Can you explain then why a number of children, when they were inspected by doctors after alleged attacks, had a number of serious injuries?
Not caused by me, they didn't.
And why did so many local authorities withdraw their children from the home? Why did so many children go to doctors with bruising on their side, with bumps on their head?
When you say so many, how many exactly?
Well, we're talking at least 4 or 5 that we've come across.
We're not talking at least.
Yes, we are.
No, we're not talking about...
So how many
well,
did
then you want to show the evidence of that, don't
How many
you?
did you give bruises to them?
I haven't given any children any bruises because I never needed to.
So how did you control these children?
Because they have more respect for me than they've got for their own families at times.
Well, if they had respect for you, why are they accusing you of violence, Mr. Percy?
Because they've been put in a situation and approached outside of the legal boundaries by the vindictive and twisted members of staff.
Why did you bounce children, Mr. Persich?
Bounce? What do you mean bounce?
You know what bouncing means.
Do I?
When the children referred to the word bouncing, what did you think it meant?
They never referred to it to me as that.
What did they refer it to then, as a violent beating?
No, they never referred to it as anything, because it never happened. I have not done a thing wrong.
Why is it then that all these children made these statements, Mr. Persich? We have asked them, Mr. Persich, and they've all told us the same thing. They've all said that you're a violent thug. They've all said you're a violent thug.
The Persiches are currently contesting Kent's attempt to revoke their licence. Meanwhile, the children of Frontier House are still haunted by their ordeal.
I sometimes, when I'm sitting on my own, think about what used to go on there and the things the staff used to say to you. And I can still sit down and cry about it now.